Everybody, I'm Denise Starling. I'm the Executive Director of Livable Buckhead, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us here today. I know we've got a lot of familiar faces with our folks from our Buckhead Property Managers Council, but we also have some folks in today from Midtown and downtown. So I'd like to welcome you to the event today, and thank you for joining us. We're really glad to have you here. And we'd also like to thank Midtown Alliance and Central Atlanta Progress for working with us, partnering on the event today to invite their folks to this meeting as well. And also special thanks to the folks here at Atlanta Tech Village who are hosting us today. So a few quick notes on the structure for today's panel. I know you all know how to use Zoom by this point, so let's just keep it simple. We have you all muted. So, but we absolutely do want to hear from you. So we want to have this as interactive as possible. So Katie is going to be monitoring comments that are up on the chat. We'll also be posting resources in the chat feature. So look there for links to the attendees that we have here today and other key documents that might be good resources for you. We will also have a question and answer session at the end of the panel, in addition to incorporating some of these questions along the way. So let's get started. I think it's pretty safe to say that things have changed a little bit in the last year and a half or so. Does everybody agree with that? Not only our personal lives, but also our work lives as well. Our dining room tables have become our offices. Our dogs are our new coworkers. Some of us like them better than our other coworkers. Masks have been the new fashion accessory that has already gone out of style before, and the most stressful part of our day, the commute, has disappeared. So today's panel is all about those changes, specifically how they're defining the new normal workplace and how we as transportation, parking, and commercial real estate professionals can and need to respond to those changes. We've assembled a great group of experts here for our panel today, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to read long bios to you. I'm just going to hit the quick top lines for each of them, but let me tell you, they're all experts in their fields, and their resumes are quite impressive. So those will be linked to the chat as well. So first, we have Kim Hensarling. She's the Director of Talent and Human Resources for Windham, Brannon. She served in that capacity for 14 years, overseeing recruitment and transfers, promotions, and employee career counseling. So welcome. Second, we have Glenn Kurtz. I think Glenn and I have known each other for about 50 years now at this point. He's the Senior Vice President of Strategic Initiatives for Legacy Parking, which operates a number of the parking facilities throughout Atlanta and in other key markets. Kate Schlechter on the other end is a general manager with Transwestern and oversees the Atlanta Financial Center for Sumitomo Corporation. Barry Hodges, with the awesome shirt on today, is the Director of Development at ParkMobile, which is an app-based product that helps users find, reserve, and pay for their parking. Chad Koenig, down on the other end there, is the Managing Director with Fisherman Wakefield's Tenant Advisory Groups. So he advises, advocates for, and negotiates on behalf of the tenants as they're looking to lease new real estate. And then finally, in the middle, we've got Garrett. He is the CEO and co-founder of ParkOffice, which is an innovative software platform that allows for flexible management of parking spaces. And he's in today from by way of New York, London, Ireland by way of New York. So we're excited to have him today. So for the structure of today's panel, we've got it divided into really three key parts for you. The first of those is we're going to work on defining that new normal workplace and really set the stage for what that's going to look like. Establish some of the ways that we think the change is coming from the parking standpoint. Next, we're going to move into the barriers to making any changes to parking. There are obviously one or two of those that we need to talk about. And then finally, we're going to move into exploring some of the creative things that are happening in the market. So it's going to be a fun conversation. Are y'all ready? Great. So let's jump right in. So I think we've got our first links up in the chat now for you. But we're going to start with the employer viewpoint. So Kim, I think it's kind of a gross understatement to say that the last year and a half has had huge impacts on the workplace. So I know you've been dealing with that quite a lot in your role. And so I'd love to hear what it looks like from your perspective and sort of what it means for you as you run your office and deal with your employees.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. So I work at Windham, Brannon. We are a 170 person CPA firm, and we are located in the 36th circuit. And we have been remote since March 17th. And we told all of our employees, we're going to go remote and we're going to try it out. We're going to make sure that we have the technology to do it. And we're just going to have this trial. And we've been out for 15 months now. So it has been very interesting. It has worked very well. We're very lucky. But we're ready to get our employees back in the office. And, it's up to me. I'm old school. I want everybody back in the office, but we all know that that's not going to happen. And we surveyed our employees, and over 80% said that they want to work remotely 2 to 3 days a week. And the reality is, you don't have a choice. That's what the way of the future is. And that's something that we have to, just deal with. And some of my old school partners who are like me, I have to, tell them that we want to attract talent. We have to have, these flexible options for our employees. So now that we're out of the woods of COVID, I don't want to jinx anything. We're trying to get our employees back in the office, and our the number one concern is parking. And our employees don't want to have to pay the full monthly rate if they're only coming into the office 1 or 2 days. And I try to sell it to them as, if you go in the office this many days, it makes sense to purchase your monthly parking, but they still don't want to do that. And some of the employees that are going into the office right now are parking across the street because they don't want to have to pay the daily rates. I think it's more painful for them to have to pay that daily rate than the monthly rate. They also don't want to pay the monthly rate because the monthly rate comes out of their paycheck. So we have made a decision as a firm to pay for parking for everybody. And that was our way that we felt like we could get more people back in the office. And if there's so many benefits of being in the office, there's so many benefits of being remote, but we didn't want parking to be a barrier. So we are now paying for everybody's parking, and we'll pay for monthly or we'll pay for daily depending on how often you go in. And this is an expense that we weren't expecting to pay. We didn't budget for, and we're estimating it's probably going to be about $130,000 for a year. So we're not sure how many people will go in daily versus monthly, but that's what we felt like we had to do. We tried to reach out to our parking management company to see if there's any other options. We're like, hey, there's monthly and there's daily, and there's nothing in between. And I think they did some research and came back and told me all the reasons why it's beneficial to be monthly over daily. And you do get a discount doing that, so I get it. But our people still don't want to pay the fees. So that's been our biggest barrier.
Great. I'm going to throw it over to Chad for that same question. As a senior rep, we're hearing from folks you're representing.
Yeah, I think the last 16 months, we all went away for 2 weeks of working from home, which turned into 16 months, and finally coming out of it, it seems like September, Labor Day feels like the magic date for a lot of large companies. Everybody's trying to adjust to working from home. You survey people. Of course, most of the folks want to stay home, but as we were talking about earlier, as people start to come back to the office, phone kind of kicks in, and you want to be back. So I think the same way we went into this experiment for 16 months, there's still a lot to be learned, and we're not going to know the whole story until we open offices back up and companies have said, all right, it's time to come in. And then you monitor if you need a lot. Then you need software that's going to track who's coming into the office every day, but how's the space being used. And I think ultimately, if you can combine that with some type of parking solution that 2 friends here on the right kind of have, then you start to find the secret sauce that is, because I agree, I'm paying for monthly parking, but if I'm only in 2 days a week, I would like to be able to have my space go back to a colleague who's coming. I'm already paying for it. So how do we reallocate that? So there's definitely a solution there. Companies don't know what they're going to do yet. They're still trying to figure it out. We've encouraged clients of ours that, let's not just jump into a new office solution post-COVID. Get your people back. Let's see how they're going to use the space. and then let's figure that out. And parking is a huge example. A lot of companies we talk to, they're like, we know how to do this shared desk, whether it's office space software or Robin that ParkMobile's using or other applications, but nobody's figured out how do you make the parking more flexible. So there's a huge opportunity.
Great. And then Kate, what are you seeing, if anything, as the property manager perspective? Are you hearing these requests from your tenants?
Yeah, so it's interesting to hear this discussion. Again, part of the solution. AFC, where I work, we have pretty traditional office users. So the questions, concerns that have been raised to me as tenants are strategizing for return to work plans has really been focused around heating. And now it's starting to get into some security concerns. So this is new to me, and I'm interested to learn more.
That makes sense. Health and safety, are the sort of first things you think about when you're bringing somebody back to the office. I would imagine you guys went through that conversation.
Yes, I feel like we've had a million different plans on how to return to the office. Originally we were going to return last July, and then it got extended out to, we thought it would be January. Now we're returning in August. I feel like my return to office plan has changed so many times. And, we're wearing masks, we're not wearing masks, we're social distancing, we're not social distancing. So I feel like, we did have our cleaning crew come more often at the beginning. I don't think people don't seem as concerned about that right now. When we surveyed our people, we asked them, why do you want to continue working from home? And almost everybody said convenience. COVID was not the reason that people didn't want to come into the office. So, we just have to be flexible with everything that we do, and returning to the office. And I'm sure that when we return in August, my plan's probably going to change again. And I feel like just every part of returning to the office needs to be flexible.
I was just going to add on to that. I think you mentioned earlier, just the war for talent, right? Companies, landlords, parking companies, those that can figure it out and put together a solution that makes it frictionless for the employee, those are the ones that are going to win, and those are the buildings that are going to be gold. So
I agree with that. I don't know if you guys have seen, but it's predicted that there's going to be a turnover soon. And now that COVID, we're out of what's COVID, people are going to start switching jobs. And it's the little things that they look at, and they're looking at the whole package. Do I have to pay for parking? Do I not have to pay for parking? What's the benefits look like? A lot of people that we're hiring right now, they want to be 100% remote. And so we have to consider that as well.
So there's a lot of change coming our way. It sounds like that's something that we really need to be looking at. I like the way Chad described that. It's an opportunity that we have in front of us. And there are some other examples, as you mentioned, the desk sharing and Hensarling, that sort of thing that can really help us with that thought leadership. So it sounds like it should be pretty easy. We got all these other things out there. You guys are already doing it for other programs. So yeah, I can hear everybody laughing out there, I'm sure, on there, because it just seems so obvious and that it's done. But we kind of know that's not the case. So I wanted to really start and get the big gorilla right off the bat. We know that parking, revenue stream from parking is a major piece of the equation for operating an office building. And so it's sort of been the sacred cow, you don't touch it. And so Chad, I'd like to throw that over your way, because I know you've done some pretty interesting research looking at how that could or could not potentially be impacted.
Yeah, sure. So I think first off, I don't think it needs to be a zero-sum game, right? I think there's an opportunity there with software. We all carry these devices in our pockets these days that we run our lives with, right? You buy an air ticket with it, you transfer money, you do everything. Your most recent pictures of your family are on there. So the point is, I think software is finally there that if it can come together in the right form and fashion, deliver a really great experience for the employee, for the parking company, for the landlord. So again, I kind of think about myself personally in our office in Midtown. I spend X amount a month for a monthly parking permit. That works out to $6 a day on average, which is why it's it's better to have it for the whole month because it's cheaper versus $20 for a 1-day visit. But I go back to, if I'm only coming in 2 days a week, I'm basically paying $6 a day. The building may charge $20 a day for a visitor. which is great for the building, great for the parking company. But what about my space that's basically sitting empty? Isn't there a way to resell that spot to a colleague who'd like to park in the building, but doesn't want to pay 20, maybe they pay 15? Parking company gets a little bit, I get a little bit of a savings. More, I mean, we all know in any parking deck, most parking decks in Atlanta, the top of them are usually empty, right? So there's capacity there. So how do you unlock that capacity so visitors can still park and you can get visitor parking revenue? How do you repurpose the employee parking that's going unused? We were talking about this earlier. If I book my desk for the week for 2 days, it's like, okay, I've got a desk for 2 days. Automatically, you want parking. Like, in my mind, like it's creating this frictionless environment that makes it so easy for you to come to the office and work with colleagues. And to Kim's point, now you're securing the best talent. So the pieces are there. It's just what companies are going to step up and kind of blow it. Right? So.
I didn't tee this up for the technology. That's sort of the second big challenge from, I know one of the things I hear all the time is, well, every parking deck's got some different technology in it. How do we do something across all of them? Len, you want to talk to that?
Yeah, so I think, a big barrier to this, I think a big strength and weakness is the park systems, parking access and revenue control systems. And historically, these were very proprietary systems. You couldn't integrate with them. And over the last 10 years, you've seen a lot more integration with those systems, whether it's hotel integration, whether it's aggregators and those type of things. So there's a lot more flexibility coming with those systems, and that's really encouraging. There is a cost, and everybody's technology is at different age. They have different, elements to it that work and don't work. So there's definitely a cost for the flexibility. So you're going to have to invest in your systems, and then ultimately, look at the revenue and see where that is and see if it's worth it. The other thing is these systems are now moving into the cloud, which is very new. We're right sort of at the cutting edge of that, which gets to your point, Chad, about more flexibility, more capabilities, looking at inventory and really getting maximum utilization out of those decks. And we're right on the cutting edge of that, which is really exciting for the industry. And so I think this is a good conversation. It's a good time for these things to discuss.
Great. So continuing on the theme of barriers and the bad news part of the conversation, let's talk about leases and how being part of your lease actually complicates everything and what the realities are of that. We did direct this to both Kate and Chad. Whoever wants to jump in first.
Well, there we go. I'll start. So the leasing part, I think, especially in CBDs, so for Atlanta, Buckhead, Midtown, downtown, the challenge has always been around parking is most buildings in the CBD, they allocate 1.5 to 1.75 parking spaces per 1,000 square feet of rent, right? And as in the past, when there were only some companies that were dense users, it's almost now like everybody, especially pre-COVID, was moving to more of an open plan. I think we're going to get back to that, maybe not as dense as we were, but spaces are being designed to 5 to 6 per 1,000. So right out of the gate, there's a deficit of parking, right? And so then, at Cushman, we're a large global real estate firm. We have a consultancy who studies the steps, utilization numbers in depth. And pre-COVID, they said utilization numbers in office space was about 51%, meaning 51% of people were actually occupying seats at any given point during the day in corporate America in their office buildings. So if you apply that math and you say, okay, we're designing to 6 per 1,000, we've got 1.5 per 1,000 parking, we're only 50% utilized, we really need 3 per 1,000. There's still a deficit, right? So that's always the push and pull, I think, especially in town. When you go into the suburbs and it's surface parking, and it's free and it's 4 or 5 per 1,000, it's really not an issue. It's really, in the CBD where that creates a rub, and of course that's when mass transit, everything else comes into play. Again, pre-COVID, proximity to MARTA was huge, right? So companies could say, okay, well, we only have X amount of parking, but right next to a MARTA station or within a quarter-mile of a MARTA station walking. I think the big thing is going to be is what happens in the years to come with autonomous cars, right? I mean, think about people arriving in autonomous cars at the building all at roughly the same time. Where do they go? I mean, that's probably another change within parking, where landlords might start to allocate certain parts of their parking for autonomous, car drop off and pickup. You can't all pull up in front of the building at once, right? So I think it's exciting because there's like just so much possibility, and it feels like the software is finally there and it's cheap. And again, we all walk around with this incredible computer in our back pocket that's stronger than any computer when we were kids that was around, right? So it's like everything's kind of converging at the right time.
Yeah, and just to add to that, as a parking manager, our job is to get, total efficiency out of that deck, to oversell that deck to a large degree, so that spaces are being used more than once throughout the day. And, the monthly rate helps with that, right? You can track that, track it by employer. There's a tremendous amount of data that we use on a daily basis to ensure that we're not parking the deck at one space, per user, that we can get 20%, 30% additional utilization. At Georgia Tech, you're at 40% on many of our lots because you have professors and students that only came in once or twice a day. So we were able, I think, to a large degree as parking managers to address those sort of density issues and make sure that the properties worked. And certainly technology is going to help that even further. So I think data is critical. We use that on a daily basis to ensure the efficiency of the decks. And I think sort of more automated type software is really helpful as well as squeezing more efficiency.
Hey, one of the things that you've mentioned is needing to restructure the way you can contract with parking operators. And that's even a thing that has come up with this discussion as well.
Really just during COVID, we did address that with legacy parking, our parking operators. So yeah, we have had to make adjustments, but in terms of changing leases, I have to paint a picture with the landlord to incentivize them to change anything. And at this point in time, we're not hearing these rumblings from the tenants quite yet. It's out there, and I think that there's a lot of brainstorming that's going on. This discussion is great for that, but it hasn't quite hit our side of that.
I was just going to add that I think to your point, it's definitely coming, and I think the same way landlords need to kind of repurpose their buildings to create an experience or to get employees to the building so companies can get their employees in. It's going to be the landlords that embrace kind of innovative outside the box thinking around parking that all of a sudden they start filling up, right? And then everyone else is like, oh wow, we do need to think about this, because why is that building across the street 95% leased and we're 65% leased, right? So it'll happen. It's going to be the forward-thinking landlords who work with forward-thinking parking companies to come up with those solutions to offer those to tenants. And it'll speak and it'll win with full buildings. So
yeah. I know that during COVID, obviously, we gave parking away for months on end in many properties to address the period of time that people weren't in the buildings. And as people return, we have to now get them back to thinking that, hey, I have to pay for parking again. It's not going to stay that way forever. And that's often a challenge when you create something that you want to be temporary. It's very hard to take it away or to, reinstitute the paid parking. So we have to be aware of that as we're dealing with people coming back to the office. We can't just keep giving it away. There's still expenses, there's still debt service, there's still all these things that go in the property. So yeah, but ideally we can create different offerings with regard to parking pricing.
So to your point, Cushman during COVID, our awesome office manager worked out in some way we can kind of share our parking with a colleague, and you work that out. And I actually opted not to do it because I felt bad that at some point I have to tell my colleague, look, I'm coming in more, I got to take this pickup, even though you're helping me pay for it. I didn't want to say that to a colleague. So it is hard, taking something away once you've kind of given it to them. So
it's too nice. So another barrier we touched on a little bit is basically what I like to call kind of a paper problem versus reality. We'll hear a lot of times, well, oh, the building's full, we've got a parking crunch, and add any additional, leases or whatever related to that, because on paper, all those parking spaces are permitted. But as I sit and look out of my office, I see the top left empty on every one of them. And so I'm curious, that kind of how you optimize the use of the parking deck is kind of a key thing that I think is part of what is the critical piece of the solution. But who wants to talk about that? Let's jump in.
Yeah.
Garrett?
I might jump in about that. I think this conference is actually being purposely built for us as ParkOffice. This is hearing from everyone here. It's the perfect time for our solution, ParkOffice, which maximizes and use of parking space in a flexible way. And I think that's where the world has gone and is going to. And I think, listening to Kim there, it took us 6 years to get to this point, and I really feel it's an inflection point across the world. We're in 14 countries, and we're seeing the same problems in New Zealand as we're seeing in California. And people will vote with their feet. And I think 80% is too strong a figure of people that don't want to come in every day of the week to be ignored, and it won't be ignored. They will vote with their feet, and if the company doesn't offer that, there's a good chance they will lead to a company that will offer that. And I think we'll see that over the next few years. What ParkOffice really does is we actually work with the real estate managers and companies. We work with the operators, and we work with the tenants. We've created a really innovative win-win-win scenario across the board through the use of software, through the use of these integrations, as you were talking about, with the barrier companies, and through the use of the world's most powerful piece of technology in your pocket, the smartphone. I eventually think it will go to autonomous vehicles. But right now we have this powerful tool that allows us to see spaces live through ParkOffice, see these spaces and see where the space is available. But also, if you have a space and you don't need it on that day, you can release that space to someone else in your team. And so that's really powerful. And as Chad was alluding to there, in that scenario, he doesn't have to be the one responsible for that space. It could be everyone in the team that can allow that person to share that space. And so one of the things I want to talk about today really is the exciting part of the real estate portfolio. And the fact is that we have these large business parks and buildings where it's not just one company now that has this need for flexibility, it's every company at the same time. You talk about September, we've had the busiest 2 quarters in our history, and we're 100% growth month on month. It's insane. And what we're seeing is these companies are going towards flexible solutions like ourselves to be able to utilize that space across their company. So if you look at one of your buildings, Chad, if you had company A that's coming back to 60% occupancy in September, and company B is going fully back, you might have company B who has more employees than parking spaces, as you said. So company B's employees, if company A could release that space into a pool for the building, Cushman building, through ParkOffice, that can now be done. And then company B's employees get the full benefit of that space that's actually there in that building from those trusted employees that are already working in that building. So that's really what we do in ParkOffice. And I think this conference is amazing. It's thank you for putting it together. And it's really a point of inflection, I think, across the industry. We work with the operators, work with the real estate managers, and direct to clients who have these issues.
You took us perfectly into the solutions part of the agenda. So very excited to hear about that. And definitely want to hear from both Glenn and Barry next. So whoever wants to jump in next to talk about your solutions and what you're.
Well, I'll jump in here. So one of the things that one of the things that we are seeing and we're doing a lot, especially with the University of California, is they are moving away from their semester permits. So what they're doing is they're actually integrating with us instead of a student going to the university and buying a permit and having to put a sticker on it or any tag or whatever. They're actually just integrating that using the ParkMobile app, and they're going and paying for their parking as they need it, right? And then the university is able to have affiliate lists that they provide to us. So their staff, their faculty, their retirees, workers affiliated with the university, even students, they're on the list. They just pull up into a space, they break open the ParkMobile app, they get your location where they want to park, and then they're charged for that parking according to what permit they would get based on whatever their affiliation is. Now, I can see some of that. Maybe there's not 100%, correlation between that and then coming into a corporate, real estate environment, parking there. But we talk about now, how do I release that parking space back? And I heard that some of the employees don't even want to buy a permit, but they're going to come back to the building and pay for that parking. That's a part where ParkMobile can integrate. ParkMobile also has lots of integrations with a lot of the equipment manufacturers in garages where we can access the garage. We have integrations where the user just pulls up. There's license plate recognition that scans the license plate, pings. Oh, that's a ParkMobile user. I'm going to send that and let the user pay the ParkMobile. So the consumer is able to just drive through. No integration at all, no friction at all. And it automatically pays for them. They just exit the ride and they're on. So how do, the real question becomes, how do we start to then integrate that sort of thing with the consumer, with ParkOffice? Hey, I have someone who has a permit pass. They're going to go into ParkOffice. They're going to whatever office management software is test, and for the, say, yes, I need parking. Oh, well, you have a permit. Okay, well, ParkOffice is going to take over, let that person park. Oh, you don't have a permit. Okay, now you're a ParkMobile user. You're going to be charged X amount of dollars to drive. You're just going to drive through. No risk.
I'd also like to highlight, as we think about solutions, is that there is no one solution that fits every property. What we're seeing for our properties across the country, for that matter, is different markets have different solutions. Different properties in the same market have very different solutions. And it's really, what are the leases of that property? What type of property is it? Is it a high-end property? Is it a low-end property? What's the actual problem, that we're trying to address with a solution? And we really have to ask all of those questions before we start thinking about putting a solution in place. Because I think there are properties that, and this is very much what we've seen in COVID, right? Everybody's been impacted differently. Some buildings are impacted differently. Some cities are impacted differently. And I do think that the parking solutions are going to all be different at different properties.
If I could just add on to that, I think what we're seeing is that the integration is the key part, and the more integratable the solutions, the better and more flexible the environment. I think where what we've seen is that, for example, with ParkMobile, they've done an incredible job in the open marketplace. So they've been able to create this environment across market, where you can pay and park digitally through your smartphone for parking. What we see is that there's just as big a market of unused space and space in the closed market, is what we call a ParkOffice. So it's essentially inside these office buildings or large business parks, where you can bring that same seamless automation and digital payment to workers on a daily basis. And I think operators, the most proficient with technology moving forward will be the ones that can adapt and see that this extra space is value and this empty space is dead value. And so I think that ParkMobile have done incredibly well in the open marketplace. We're looking to them and saying, okay, we can do this for the closed marketplace.
Can you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, when we prepared for this, one of the things that was really interesting is how that closed market applied to property management teams that have multiple buildings in an area. Talk a little bit more about that part.
Sure, yeah, and use Cushman as a great opportunity for this. So essentially, if you're a Cushman and Wakefield portfolio company, and you have multiple sites, not only in Atlanta, but maybe across the world. Chad, you were talking about going to Dublin at some stage. Imagine you open up the ParkOffice app and it has your profile, and you can access the building seamlessly in Atlanta or multiple buildings in Atlanta based on your profile. But also when you go to Dublin, you can seamlessly enter and access the spaces in Dublin and the empty spaces. And that is all connected. Right now we do this in ParkOffice, and you can actually then offer that to your tenants and say, can you imagine a Twitter employee, let's say Cushman, who can not only access the empty space in the Twitter building, but in any Cushman building where there's an empty space across the world. And that's the important thing here, is that you're giving maximum tenant value across the board. And I think empty space is dead anyway. So you might as well get that extra value for your tenant.
So Kim, what do you think about these new technology options, and how do you think they're embraced by your team?
My team would love them, but I also hear this in my mind. I'm like, how in the world is that going to work? You know, like, our company's paying for parking right now. So say we have ParkMobile and ParkOffice app, and what if I just go down to a building to visit a friend for lunch, and I should be paying for that personally, and then it may go to my other accounts, and my company ends up paying for it. One question that I do have is I was wondering, you know, as we mentioned, some companies may not have the same issues that I'm having. And do you see, if you're in a building, are there some companies that use you all and some companies that don't use you all? And my other thought is, how in the world is our parking company connected with this? You know?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kim. And I think that the first thing you want to do is collect the data, and that's the first insight you need to see. So as you're now taking that step to pay for parking, what I would say is, you know, each car park is different. So we have to first analyze the current situation, and then we curate a policy based on data from other successful clients across the world. So actually parking is different in different lots. So seeing what works in another lot similar to yourself. So when you say payments, so I would say, for example, first analyze where it's busy, when it's busy, what days it's busy. Then maybe you're in a shared building. Maybe you can share out those spaces when they're not being used to other companies beside you. When their employees pay for that parking on a daily basis, those trusted employees, that reduces your bill on a monthly basis. So you actually save money each month by other people using that dead space. Okay.
So just on average, like money's running through my head, you know, I'm not an accountant, but I do work for an accounting firm. Like, how is it determined, how much if you determine that you're gonna have monthly passes, how is it determined the cost of the monthly pass? And then you're saying the people that come in daily, are they still charged the normal daily rate of the garage? Or is it like a discounted rate because we're working with you?
Yeah, so generally what we do is incentivize the use of space, right? The use of dead space. So we say, look, this is already paid for. Okay, if it's left idle, it's dead. It's no use to anyone. So what we do is we say it's incentivized on day rate. Okay, so this person is then saying, okay, I do want to use this space today. Now I can access it through ParkOffice and pay that incentivized daily rate. So it might be another set rate that you decide to implement within the company or across the building. Now the great thing is you have the flexibility to change that. So you can change it per day. You might have busier days at a different rate for different days or different times a day. So it really comes down to that curated policy for you in your area. So you might be in a really high demand area, so it might be a higher rate. We have a location in Dublin, for example, and it's the most lucrative car park right next door. And we've unlocked 300 empty spaces in one building. So that 300 spaces is bigger than the most lucrative car park in the country. And that's making a huge amount of money for that property manager, and also releasing that cost from the lease to the tenant. So you can see, you know, even doing simple maths, do the basic day rate per the amount of employees, say take 25% of the cost is cut off. What does that save to you? I think you said it was 130,000. That's a significant saving for us.
That goes back to Chad's point, if it's not a zero-sum conversation anymore.
Exactly.
Yeah, I love hearing what you guys are saying. It seems like it's coming. It's just gonna take a little bit more time, and it's gonna be, parking companies who are forward thinking can get their head around that. And again, Kim, to your point, it's like if I'm paying, back to my example myself, I'm paying on average $6.50 a day. Daily parking for one person is $20, but I'm not gonna be in, and a colleague can basically get my spot for $12. And maybe I save $1 and the parking company makes a couple extra bucks and my colleague doesn't pay 20, they pay, 12. So.
And the building still makes.
And the buildings, yeah, I mean, that's where I think if people get sharp elbows and say, wait a second, it's not gonna work. And again, that's why I say, it's a some game. I think the software is there now and it's getting better. We all have the great technology in our pockets, it tracks us everywhere. So, putting that all together is something that's favorable for the employee, parking operator, landlord, et cetera. So a huge advantage. So.
I think we have one question that's been online so far.
Yeah, it's a post for the farm manager, really. Whether or not tenants would be willing to pay increased costs for parking to potentially cover the expense of upgrading the technology. So if it really meant making
I might just jump straight in there and show that we've actually saved our companies and clients that we work with. We give them an impact report after the first month and first 3 months to show them actually in terms of the amount of efficiency that's been saved, or whether it's the spaces that have been shared and saved. So across the majority of our clients, we actually save them money. So there is no need for increased prices.
So there's no need to do any kind of infrastructure.
No, and in a lot of cases, we do a trial for a month where we'll actually show that before actually charging. So it's really impactful for us, depending on the client, depending on the location. We will go in and show them that instant data, instant benefit through the software.
Was there very often with park systems, you have to pay extra fees for that integration, for example. So whether it's aggregators, and you want that integration, you pay an extra fee. If it's a hotel application, you pay an extra fee. I mean, I would imagine there's extra fees for the integration of your system, and obviously you're taking a piece of all of these transactions that are now going on. I imagine. So something.
How do you make your money? Is what I'm saying.
So we charge a per space per month fee. So we charge based on the amount of spaces that are managed, purely so that we can show the impact per space. So that, if we're managing a 2,500 space lot, we can show that direct impact for the amount of spaces that we're managing, the efficiency or cost saving that we brought to those spaces, and the return to those spaces, which a lot of people want to see. So we do that per space per month, and essentially with the implementation costs, our barrier partners and operator partners are becoming much more open now with open APIs. I don't want to get too technical. These open APIs allow us to get in and link the software so that it's actually on a global scale. You're able to connect with thousands of different lots that have these different barrier systems that the bigger companies, the Insignias of the world, they're all now integrated once you do that first implementation. So we've actually, over the last 6 years, we've teamed up with the majority of the large barrier installation companies and done that integration already. So we pass that on to the customer. We don't charge extra every single time.
So I'm going off script here, but a question that comes to mind for me, top of mind issue for Buckhead right now is security. And a lot of what we're talking about seems like it's bringing people who aren't necessarily people who are tenants in the building into the parking decks. And so I can imagine that might be a little bit of a concern for the property managers. And I'm curious, have you had that issue come up, and how do you address that? Because I know you mentioned your trusted network.
Yeah. So this is probably where we probably slightly differ in that ParkMobile have been champions in the open market. So, you know, millions of users around America have the ParkMobile app. However, what we found is that having started in that space, the open marketplace, coming to a closed marketplace, what we found is that the property managers tend to want to keep it as a closed market, and that the employees are trusted in that building, and they don't know who's outside, and they're not sure as, you know, if they let them in, what's going to happen, right? So it's that fear of the unknown, and that tends to stop a lot of these deals happening where you can rent out your space to anyone on the street. So what we found is that the property managers, the landlords, etc., the operators, they're much more comfortable with releasing those spaces to other people in the building or other people in the portfolio. So if I'm a Facebook employee in Cushman or a Twitter employee in Cushman, I'm still trusted by Cushman, so I'm more likely to rent out that space across the portfolio to a trusted tenant or employee in that building, rather than someone who I don't know that might be a trusted member in a platform like ParkMobile, but maybe not yet trusted by property management. I think this will change over time. As we said, I think there'll definitely be more integration. I think governments will play a part in opening the spaces to everyone if there's a space.
I do agree with that assessment about the open market space and closed. But what we are seeing at ParkMobile is more of a trend of using the technology to allow access to lots, like I mentioned earlier with universities. Right now, we also have within that a way of denying access. So the general public cannot park in certain lots on the university. So using that same technology, you can then say, hey, I have this lot here or this garage that I want to park, but I want to open it up and say someone who isn't a permit holder can still park, right? I can put them on a list and say, you are a trusted individual based on your license plate or based on your email, based on some identification piece. And then that particular garage user shows up, is allowed to park simply because their vehicle is on the lot. And then they are charged based on whatever your policies are. So there are ways you can sort of do that and close the gap, right? I completely agree. ParkMobile's focus is on the open process. That's where we are. That's our bread and butter. But parking is parking, right? And what we want to do is our goal, our mission is that, and I think you said it earlier too, is every time someone gets in their vehicle, we want them to think about where do I need to park, whether they're going to work or whether they're going to an event or a concert or they're just going to, where am I going to park? And that's what ParkMobile brings, is to bring all that together to that person to say, I have a single place that I go, right? And I'm integrated into all these things. I know I can use my ParkMobile app, I can use the ParkOffice app, but they're also both integrated. I can use one.
So if you're a company that has a lot of clients coming to visit you at your building or my building over here, what's the visitor experience for either of the systems? And how do I make sure I make it easy for my clients to go to the building? Do they need to still pull a ticket and do all that, or how does that work?
In addition to that would be, we pay for a lot of our clients parking to come in and validate it. So how does that work?
ParkMobile has a solution for that as well. We do validation, we do a ticket takeover where yes, the client can pull a ticket, they can scan a ticket. We have promo codes. You can then validate and pay for the customer's parking in that way. If you know that they're coming in a scheduled meeting, you can put them on a list and say, this person is already allowed in, and you don't charge this person. Whereas another visitor just shows up unannounced, you might actually say, maybe charge.
Yeah, this is, any solution that is created in the commercial office market has to have a validation component. And whether it's the park system or whether it's something that layers over that's integrated with the park system, have to have that validation. With new technology and barcode technology, you're really seeing where you could send a validation to email a validation to a person before they come to the office. So the whole old school, pull a ticket, maybe get a chaser ticket, and that's still very much out there in the market, but that's slowly moving away to where you're really, this is all going to be digitized, it's all going to be part of your phone. Ultimately, your card, in a sense, is going to be becoming computers. So it's all going to be sort of sent to you, and it's really going to be getting rid of this sort of paper. I could sort of see that going away and not too distant.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think what we do is essentially we look to get the validation out of the way quickly, and then to make that as seamless as possible on entry. So, we even have some clients for license plate recognition. They come in, their license plate is picked up, and they're in and away. I think in terms of for us, it's we can do the QR codes, we do all of that. I think for us, it's more the allocation as to where in the lot as well. It's a big part of the challenge. It's not just letting people in; it's also to show where they should go once they're in the lot. So you have massive tech giants, for example, who have 15, 30,000 people, right? So they're coming into the office and, hey, you're a guest, but where are you going? They have events on site. And I'm sure, in terms of colleges, it's the same, but you have events on site where there's hundreds of people attending. How do you get that information to them so there's not chaos on the day? There's not time spent for people trying to figure out where am I going? And that's a big part of the challenge. So we don't just do the payments bit, we don't just do the management bit, we also do the wayfinding. We also integrate directly with the park. We have a communication platform too as well. So we can actually integrate directly to the messaging. So for example, if there's building works happening on one side of the park, how do you communicate that? If there's a flood, which we're seeing more and more of, unfortunately. Well, how do you communicate where is safe to go and where is so that's really where ParkOffice comes in and adds that extra layer, which can be used by an operator or building manager as well.
That's awesome. Do you guys also integrate with valet parking? We have some older clients that have valet, or I will say the ticket system is going to have to be around for those people that, we have 80-year-old clients that are coming in and they don't have smartphones. So there still needs to be the old school validation.
Yeah, so we have in our settings, we have different profile personas, and we can set different priorities or personas for people who maybe are not as tech literate as others. So it makes it easier for that whole transition to happen in the nicest possible way. I think what we would see is that just to come back to that, like, we don't do everything. I don't want to come across to do everything. So I would say in terms of the piece on switching over from paper, I think there has to be a policy change across the board. I think as a company, you have to realize that this is a more efficient way of doing business and it's better for everybody. And I think the company has to make that change. And what we're seeing more and more of is that companies are stepping forward and saying, this is better for every single employee in the company. And it's a policy change that we can make, and COVID is a perfect excuse to do that.
Do we have another question?
Yeah, not a particular website. But one, I think from the personal market, landlord, what how be able to do something like this, and there was something about analyzing the data, and what it looked like. Did this, who would analyze your consultant, who could really take that on?
Both of those are kind of how to go to the next step questions. So
Yeah, I agree. And those were the questions that were coming to mind for me. So I think from my perspective, one of my questions, and we kind of discussed this before we got started, don't, we have issues with parking violations on a day-to-day. This sounds like it could be a little bit of a hornet's nest for, bringing more people onto the property. So how do you approach that?
Great, so I suppose in terms of the software, it allows us to do really fun new things. And so with enforcement, what we really try to do is make that as seamless as possible and save as much time as possible. So I'll explain it now. So imagine you're driving in to your parking space and you get space 1A, okay? You drive in, someone's in 1A, right? It's a real thing. It's happened to so many people on a daily basis. So what happens normally today is people go in, they see someone in 1A, and they drive to another space and they give out to someone maybe in reception, right? That's what happens. Pretty little. There's not very much tracking. Sometimes they'll be towed away, maybe they'll be found in different parts of the world. That's not very efficient. It's a time suck. So what we do is you drive in, someone violates your space, goes into your space, you can put in their vehicle registration number, then sends them a ping, says, hey, buddy, you're in my space. No, please don't do that again, right? And then we'll actually shoot you their space, okay? So then you save that time, you automatically go to their space. But what it does is in the software, it pushes them down the algorithm. So they're less likely now to get a space going forward because they're violated. So once people know, an innate instinct too, if we can get away with things, we generally try and do that. For a lot of people, they cut corners. But when you know you're being tracked or caught, stop that completely. So we have this sort of self-enforcement policy where you can put that into the software, you can have different rules around it, but it creates this sort of environment where it's a smarter culture, drops the violations down to next to zero immediately once people realize they're being tracked. And then you have that sort of much smarter.
Yeah, and just to sort of get back to the question a little bit, what we're doing as parking managers is we're delving into the data for our clients right now, looking at car utilization, how often are people coming into the office, where can we maybe create a flexible rate where appropriate or where not, working with the parking managers to identify the problems that they're having and what solutions they want to create. So I think those are a big part of the next steps. The other thing that we're doing as the parking managers is identifying new technologies, new solutions, and new systems that will help address these type of things. And obviously, new technology you want to test out, you want to make sure it works as sold, if you will. And we are definitely feeding all these new technologies which are coming out on almost a weekly basis now. We're sitting down with them, we're testing their systems, we're digging into it. We're doing that, as representatives to our clients.
I would jump in there just on that and the setup process. I think it's with software, it's a huge benefit in that it's actually quite quick to implement. So it's not like installing new hardware. It's actually quite quick to implement. We have 12 Fortune 500s across the US actually working with ParkOffice right now. We're in 14 different countries. We manage over 500,000 people parking. So it's not a new thing. I think there is new companies trying to bring this technology to life. But really, I'd probably look at other companies who've been in the parking space for years that really understand parking, because it's not the same in every parking lot. And I think like ParkMobile, they understand the problems over time. New companies won't understand that. And that's the benefit that we have. It took 6 years to get to this inflection.
We are at time. This has been a fantastic conversation, and you can tell just by the fact that everybody's picking their mics up that we want to continue it. So a whole lot more conversation needs to happen. So I would sum it up by saying change is coming. We know there's an issue coming on the horizon, but we know there are some barriers to it, but there's also some great options out there. So I'm very excited to have had all of you here on the panel today. I think this has been really helpful. So thank you very much for your time. And thanks to all the folks who have joined us today. We appreciate it having you with us. Have a good day.